All right, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we're only on the second lesson in Module 2, and already I'm going to have to deviate a bit. I'm going to have to switch things up just a little bit to make sure that everything is clear. For our Module 3 notes today, we are going to move on to Lesson 3-2. However, this is going to be a little different than the 3-2 in your book. We'll talk about that, we'll look at that, but what I'd like to do is something a little different. I would like to talk today about common multiples and least common multiples. And actually, let me write that a little differently. We'll talk common multiples and least common denominators, because that is how we will mostly use them today. Zoom in on that a bit so you can see it more easily. And we'll put our Roman numeral, which for Lesson 2, wow, this is problematic today. There we go. For Lesson 2, our Roman numeral will just look like that, 2 Y's. We will begin with some vocabulary. Specifically, some of these words that are up here in the title that may not make a ton of sense or be super familiar. Okay. Number 1, multiples. Okay, multiples. I said common multiples, but what are multiples? Multiples, we've talked about briefly before. These are just all the products of a number. So whatever that number is, 4, 7, 13, all the products of a number multiplied by different factors. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, let's start with something pretty familiar, pretty simple. Let's start with the number 2. If I want to find all of the multiples of 2, then I start with 2 and I just start multiplying it times stuff. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 6 is 12. And so on, and so on, and so on. Literally forever. So don't worry, we're not going that far. I think earlier I made a comment about finding all of the multiples of a number. That is not possible. Again, they go on literally forever, because you can always come up with something bigger to multiply that original number by. Usually, for what we're doing, going out the first 5 multiples, maybe the first 10, is usually enough. The examples on the notes today, we're going to be going out to the first 10 multiples, which is just your tens times tables. Okay, so multiples, we know what those are. But it still doesn't help with this word, common. I want you to think of common the way you say that you have things in common with your friends. You have common interests. You have things that are the same. For common multiples, and later common denominators, it'll work the same way. Common multiples are multiples that are shared, by 2 or more numbers. Multiples that are shared by 2 or more numbers. Let's talk about what that is. I'm going to give you a different number to start with this time, 3. we're actually also going to be using the number 4. We're going to compare these two together. We'll get back to 4 in a moment. For 3, again, you're just skip counting by 3s. 3 times 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, and so on. Just keep counting up. 21, 24, 27. Again, we can stop at 30. That's the first 10. That should be more than enough. Okay. We're going to do the same thing with 4. What are the multiples of 4? Well, 4 times 1, 4 times 2, 4 times 3, times 4, times 5, times 6, times 7, times 8, times 9, times 10. So on and so on and so on forever. Now, some of you are probably already noticing there are numbers in the top line that also appear in the bottom line. For instance, 12 is here. It's also there. These are common multiples. Those are common multiples. 24 and 24. Now, we got a little more space, so my bubble is going to look pretty weird, but those are common multiples. So the common multiples of 3 and 4 are 12, 24. There are more of them. There are more. In fact, if I even went out just 2 more up top, we would see 36. There's an infinite number. We're not going to find them all. Usually what you're looking for is the least. The least, the smallest common multiple. In this case, 12, the first thing that shows up in both lists. Okay. In fact, let's add that to our vocabulary. Least common multiple. And I know for some of you probably feeling frustrated, I keep going back and forth between multiple and denominator. Multiple and denominator. We know a denominator is the bottom of a fraction. In Module 3, working with fractions, you are going to need to find common denominators. We'll talk about that in the next couple of lessons. You use least common multiples to do that. Least common multiple is the smallest, the least, the smallest multiple shared by 2 or more numbers. Okay. The smallest multiple shared by 2 or more numbers. Looking back at the example here, we already talked about it, but let's write it formally. LCM, least common multiple. The LCM of 3 and 4 is 12. And that's it. That's pretty much all we're going to be practicing today. I'm going to do 2 more examples with you, give you a little bit more of a taste of how this works, but then that's pretty much it. The lesson in class is going to just be practicing doing this. I know you guys love when I say this. The stronger your multiplication facts are, the better you have those memorized, the easier this is going to be. The easier this is going to be. Okay. Let's start by trying to find the LCM of 5 and 7. Okay. Got 5 here, 7 here. I usually put the smaller number on top. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. There are pros and cons for doing it both ways. I just like to keep it in order. Times 1, times 2, times 3, times 4, and so on. Just go ahead and count out. Now, some of you are saying, do we have to go all the way to 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No. Let's stop here and see if this is enough. We can always extend the line if we don't see anything. Now, 5s are pretty easy. That's why I blasted through that. For 7s, You might need to take a little more time thinking about those fact families. This is the happy counting you guys love so much. 7 times 2 is 14. Times 3 would be 21. Times 4 is 28. Times 5 is 35. Times 6 is 42. Hold on a moment. Some of you have probably already noticed that there is a line, or rather a number, that repeats in both lines. I got to stop as soon as I see one. I don't have to go any farther. That's it. I'm done. Since I'm looking for the least common, the smallest common, well, the first thing that shows up in both lines is 35. So there's no reason for me to keep going. That's it. The LCM of 5 and 7 is 35. That is the smallest multiple for those two numbers. Let's try another one. LCM of, let's do 12 and 18. You may need to work this out on graph paper if you're not sure how to do these in your head, or if adding the 12s and the 18s is too much trouble. Use graph paper. 12 and 18. Now for this one, I'm going to show you one of the good reasons why you would start with the larger number. I know I put it on the bottom, but let's start with the bigger number, just for fun. We're only going to go out to the first 5. These are longer, they're bigger numbers. Let's find the first 5 multiples. 1 times 18 is 18. That one's always easy, that one's a freebie. Okay. 18 times 2, I'll help you out. That would be 36. Times 3 would be 54. Times 5 would be 72. Okay. Times, excuse me, I said times 5. I'm sorry, folks, that's times 4, no wonder. Times 1, times 2, times 3, times 4. This one would be times 5. As I was writing it down, it didn't look right. Okay, better stop. Let's try the 12s. I feel a little more confident with the 12s. Times 1, times 2, times 3. I'll do a few more just to show you that often these things do repeat. But I've already got my lowest one. My least common multiple is going to be right here. That's the first number that appears in both lines. Now 72 also appears in both lines if I go out far enough, but I don't really need that one. I want the least common multiple. Well, the least common multiple, the smallest common multiple, is 36. We go out a little bit farther, that way, I mean, again, you can see, but really, as soon as you see that one that repeats, stop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at a time, usually a good place to start. I went out a little farther with the 12, I went a little out farther with these, just to kind of show you. But really, 5 is usually a good place to start. Get the first 5 multiples. If you don't see anything repeating, then do one more in each row. Do one more in each row until you find one that does. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have to go out 2 more times before I see something that repeats something that also appeared in the 7 line. All right. That's it for lesson 3-2. When I see you in class, we're going to practice doing this. We're going to play around with some other ways to find it, although this is the one you'll use the most often is my guess. All right, if you have any other questions, just make note of them, write them down, and we'll go over them together. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you in class.